Hello everyone, my name is Victor. I am the Occult Technician, and this is Mind War, Season 5, Episode 6.
Mind War is sponsored by Victory Work Apparel. Use promo code Mind War. Join the Mind War today. Enlist at patreon.com/mindwar. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to Mind War, folks. I appreciate you being here. We have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Folks, today I want to start out by talking about a few comments that I saw on the YouTube channel. Two comments came in particular, the same subject, and that was the length of the Mind War videos. They said, Victor, we really like the content that you provide, but your videos are very long. Have you ever thought of shortening them down and really getting just to the heart of what's important in each video? And I saw these comments a few weeks ago, and I didn't respond to them right away. I really wanted to think about it. You know, why do I do more of the long form podcast? Why am I try to keep them at an hour, as you all know. Some of them spill over to an hour and a half plus, but my goal is really to get that hour mark, right? And so I really started to think about it. And this really is something that has been at the heart of the Mind War podcast from the very beginning. And this is the mind or the thought process that I was going through to get to this 1 hour length, right? So I know that over the last decade or so, it seems like here in the United States and in the West, we've seen a dramatic shift away from traditional religion. People just don't go to church anymore like they used to. Now, personally, I think that's a good thing. Anytime we can move away from the Judeo-Christian paradigm, anytime we can move away from those belief systems, the religions, social, cultural beliefs that are kind of forced upon us. Anytime we can question those things and move away from them, I think that's a good thing. It helps us grow as a society, right? So one of the things that I do with the Mind War podcast, and I'm sure all of you noticed this, is my videos premiere on Sundays at noon, okay? This is a time traditionally reserved for church, right? From 9 to noon is normally when church services are going. And I release the Mind War podcast on Sundays at noon for that exact reason. I really hope that for those who have walked away from traditional church, but are still looking for something not necessarily to believe in, because again, I'm not here to try to get you to believe in me, but really something more to challenge their belief systems, to grow spiritually and intellectually, right? I hope that the Mind War podcast can provide that for people. On Sundays, instead of going to a traditional church where you're taught all sorts of things that kind of hold you down, instead we can turn to the Mind War podcast where we are learning uplifting, tools to be more successful and happier and more content in our lives. So that was a big part of it. But the next part, and this is why we are reading through the books, all three of Robert Monroe's books. It's why we did such a deep dive into the Monroe Institute itself. It's why we've kind of looked into some of the conspiracies surrounding it. And the goal here, and this is really 4 separate seasons of the Mind War podcast, from Mind War seasons 3, 4, 5, and 6. I believe that's what it's going to take to finish up this Gateway program, this whole Gateway series, right? Is I want this to be the definitive series on the Gateway Experience tapes. I've been hearing about these things in conspiracy lore and myth for over 2 decades. I hear the same things talked about over and over and over again by people who've never, 1, listened to the tapes, and never, 2, experienced the tapes, right? So again, just those kind of talking heads pushing this conspiracy of, again, the spying on the Soviets and, whatever, right, that went on with these tapes in the past. Fine. That's a great story, but guess what? We've all heard it a million times. And we're all, and this is going for everything, I think, right now, right? I just happen to be exploring the Gateway Experience tapes, right? In future seasons, we'll get deeper into occultism and we'll break those things down. But I think that's where people are moving to today. It's, late 2024. I think we're getting into a world and a mindset where we're like, we don't want to just hear your headlines anymore. Right? We don't want to just hear the nonsense. We don't want to, I listen to these podcasts and I hear the same people or the same story being told at surface level about whatever conspiratorial subject over and over and over again by different people. You could have a podcaster that'll have 20 different experts on a subject come on, and they all say the exact same thing. It's all surface level bullshit, and they try to wrap it up in 1 hour. That's not what the Mind War is, okay? Here we are doing the deep dives. The Gateway Experience program series is an entire year. It's going to take an entire year to finish this. That's a deep dive. That's being the definitive series on the Gateway Experience program, okay? So that's why we do this. That's why it's an hour long. It gives people time to fill in space where they normally or in the past would be going to some type of church or a religious service or something like that. And I know personally, I listen to podcasts from the moment I wake up to the moment I fall asleep. They're on constantly. I'm always listening to them. Different podcasts all throughout the day, throughout the week. So I like to think that I'm adding to that playlist for people, right? I listen to the Mind War podcast, right? Every week when it comes out, I make sure that I listen. And again, it's just added into that playlist. So that's kind of why we did it. And again, this idea of being that definitive series on this Gateway Experience, because we've learned so much. We've learned that the tapes are first and foremost and most importantly, self-help. It's not about spying on other people. It's not even about the hypnosis, out-of-body experience, and astral travel. Those are all great, amazing, powerful tools that we're learning. Intuition and manifestation, all of these things are beautiful. But most importantly, it's the self-help. It's the early days of the tapes, those first 4 waves by Robert Monroe himself, where we heal, right? We are healing our mind, body, and spirit. That's what the Gateway Experience tapes are. We're moving away from just the silly conspiracy stuff, and we're getting to the root, the truth, the reality of what these tapes really are and what they can do for your life. With that being said, let's get back into Ultimate Journey by Robert Monroe. We left off on Chapter 10, Detached Retinue. Okay, So here's the deal, folks. I'm not going to read much out of this chapter, okay? Because basically, here's what happens in chapter 10. So Robert Monroe goes through, and in his out-of-body experiences, he has tried to transition away from someone who was just exploring, and now he's transitioned over to trying to be a spirit guide, someone who is interacting with people who have recently died and helping them move forward, move up the next levels after we pass away, right? So the first man that he helps, basically Monroe says he gets into the out-of-body state. He kind of gets what he calls on the interstate. So he's just kind of on the freeway. He's going through space, time, wherever, right? And just listening for signals. And when a signal calls him, he goes to it. Now, what does that mean? When you're really having an out-of-body experience, what does that mean? What are you seeing? Visually, you are seeing yourself basically floating through darkness. And it's almost like snippets of dreams are flashing in front of you. And that's really what I saw in today's tape, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's really like almost changing the channel on television. You know, here are an infinite number of dreams that you can have. Which one do you want to dive into? Which one calls to you, right? So Monroe's seeing this, and if he would hear a signal that was very strong, he would go to it, right? And what he was finding is that these signals were, again, coming from people who had just passed away and didn't quite know what to do. So the first one that he comes upon, basically he floats down to a city, into an apartment, and he sees a man and woman having relations. And there was a third man there who was a ghost. And he was trying to get in on the relations, right? And Monroe said, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" The man didn't know that he had died yet. So basically the story, this man says, "Yeah, I was walking over here. I felt a pain in my chest. I fell over. But a few minutes later, I got up. I felt fine. And I came here. And, I found someone else having relations with this lady. And now I'm trying to," right? And Monroe has to calmly talk him down and say, "Listen, man, you're dead. It's just not going to work. You died. And I can show you how to move up the levels. We'll get you away from this." Because the guy this ghost was almost in a manic state trying to make this happen, right? But he couldn't physically interact, so he was kind of freaking out. So Monroe takes his hand, and they start floating upwards. And as they go through the different layers of, spirituality that lay beyond the earth, right? We've kind of talked about those different layers that occur. Monroe says, all of a sudden he looks back down and the man had disappeared. He was no longer holding his hand. And he tried to, Monroe says he tried to kind of pinpoint where that man's signal was, where's his energy at right now. And he realized that that man ended up, remember from a few seasons ago, Monroe talked about this kind of pit of human bodies, of basically human ghosts who had just passed, but they were still very focused on physical expression of reproduction. And he said it was just this pile of ghostly bodies, writhing in and out of each other, trying to achieve some type of satisfaction. And he said that's where the man went. He was called to it, and that's where he went. I mean, that sounds like some hell type shit to me, folks. I don't know. Maybe that's what we hear when we talk about this idea of hell, right? That's creepy shit. So that's the first one Monroe says that he helps, okay? Again, I'm not reading through these stories very... there's not much to read to share with you from these stories. There's just a couple of things. And in this next one, I do want to share this. So now Monroe... is helping an old lady. Okay, so this is a separate out-of-body experience that he had. He says he is called to this old lady who's in a hospital bed. It's a very sad story. That's why I'm not reading it. Basically, she was lying in bed. She was in a ton of pain. And she was just tired of being in pain. And she wanted to just finally leave. And so he went to visit her. And he reminded her, hey, you don't have to be in pain anymore. The reason that I'm here, the reason that we're talking is because you've already passed. And she was trying to explain to him, no, I need the doctor to let me know that I've died. Where's the doctor at? Why hasn't he told me that I've died yet? And then she's asking, are you a doctor? And Monroe says, I told her I wasn't a doctor. Oh boy, folks, that's embarrassing. Because when I read that, it made me realize something. Through the entire Gateway Experience series that we've been doing here, I've been calling Robert Monroe Dr. Robert Monroe. And so I said, oh shit, I need to do a little research. And sure enough, folks, from the Wikipedia, from the books, I don't think Robert Monroe actually is a doctor, okay? So that's very embarrassing. When I read through the initial books, he's always hanging out with doctors. Everyone he talks to is a doctor, and I think that's kind of where I came into this idea that he himself was a doctor, Dr. Robert Monroe. So I was like, oh, crap, that was kind of an embarrassing revelation. But again, I try to be as transparent with all of you that I can, right? So that's my mistake. So Dr. Monroe went on to say this to this lady. He said, I told her that being physically dead doesn't change you much at first. You just don't have a physical body anymore. You're only remembering the pain now, but you don't have the pain itself. Look around, I said. See for yourself. So I thought that was interesting, is that this poor lady, even though she had already passed on, she was still remembering the pain. So we've seen this with people who have lost limbs. Now, when I was in California, my neighbor, a wonderful family, they were my family's best friends, and the father, he was my best friend. I was so thankful to have such a great guy live right next door. We had such fun together, just chilling out, being dads, right? It was really great. But he got into a motorcycle accident and had his leg amputated underneath the knee, like on his calf there. And we had a lot of conversations about the ghost pains that he would have. That was a very difficult time for us. It was a very challenging time. Maybe I'll share that more in the Patreon. But there was a lot of conversations about those ghost pains that he would have. And I thought that was interesting of, again, we get physical pain from our physical body, the actual nerves and all of that. But it's that pain is stored in our memory. And so whether the pain is actually physically occurring or not, it doesn't matter. The mind can still hold on to the image of the pain and recall it at times. And so I thought that was interesting. I thought, again, this was a sad story. Monroe ultimately grabs her hand and they float up through levels, and she's looking for her husband who had passed away 5 years before. Monroe looks down and she had disappeared, right? And so that's really what Monroe goes on through the rest of this chapter. He helps a young man, which was kind of like a gang member type kid who had been shot outside of a convenience store. He helps him understand that he's dead and helps him move forward. And then the last one, basically, it sounds like he goes back in time to some type of tribe where a young lady who wasn't able to have children ultimately was sacrificed by the tribe to the gods or whatever. And the way that they sacrifice is that she was supposed to jump off this cliff and into the water and die. And she said, every time I jump into the water, I just float back up to here and I jump again, but I never die. I try over and over and over again, but I never die. And he basically explains to her, yeah, you're already dead. It's time to go upwards, right? And so she thinks of him as this god. So that's interesting, right? These older tribal folks are having these visions and having these spirits come to them. But Monroe is saying, yeah, that's just me, a man from the future who's studying science and doing the Gateway Experience tapes, having out-of-body experiences, learning the tools that we're learning here of astral travel through time and space. And he's going back and presenting himself to these people who have passed away and helped them. Maybe that's what some of these, spirits, these gods that were visiting people in the past, again, maybe that was the mind warriors, citizen samurais, guerrilla gurus, and warrior monks. Those of us who have learned these tools, maybe it's us going back and visiting and implanting some of these stories, right? Very interesting stuff here. But really, that's the rest of that chapter. There was nothing else here that I thought was worth bringing up. Again, the story is just kind of strange, a little sad. Another one of those chapters that kind of takes a detour from the rest of the book. Again, that was chapter 10, Detached Retinue from Ultimate Journey by Dr. Robert Monroe. All right, folks, let's dive into chapter 11, Turning Inward. Okay. So Dr. Monroe says some of the things that, again, we need to deal with. We have to look inward to deal with those things. And one of the things that he says he found when looking inward, when doing his introspection, was the memory layer. He says, I tested the storage system several times with great fascination. Upon selection of a given point in the past, I relived the event in every detail, down to each minute, down to each minute sensory input, thought, and emotion. I soon realized that such supermemory was not altogether pleasurable. With such intense hindsight, one becomes all too painfully and sadly aware of the many irrational decisions made, the stupid mistakes, and the missed opportunities. The exciting incidents were no longer exciting because I knew the outcome. The joyous moments often seemed infantile, and the infantile sad and amusing. So again, he finds this memory layer. He's able to have an out-of-body experience, visit this memory layer, and go back and relive with great detail memories of his past. Just like we did with exploring intuition. We went back and with very minute detail relived an intuitive event and acted upon it. We affected that event. We made it occur. And one of the things that I warned you about is when you do that, you're also going to be kind of hit with a rush of the other side of intuition, which is disappointment, where you don't follow your gut, where you don't trust your instincts, where you have missed opportunities, stupid mistakes, and irrational decisions. And that is tough, folks. You can go back and relive those mistakes in minute detail, okay? We have to be careful when we do that we don't do it as a form of punishment for ourselves. We're not doing that to go and beat ourselves up about it, okay? Now that we've separated ourselves and we get some time and space from these events, we can go back and we can still review them, but maybe get a better understanding of what they truly are. Look at how they affected our lives. looked at how making one bad decision led to other bad decisions, right? And again, not a form of punishment, a form of growth and learning, because now we know we're going to move forward away from those type of things. And now that we go through this, now we understand again more and more that when that exciting, confident intuition event occurs, that we have to act on it. We start to trust our intuition more because of it. And that comes from that memory layer. And again, is the memory layer something that's just held in each of us as individuals inside of us, or is this more some type of technology out there in the universe that holds the entire experience of every human being, of every living thing throughout the universe, right? So let's see. Next one we have is the fear layer. It says, moving inward to the next section of my inner self, I found an area I had definitely not expected. I discovered that I was indeed far from fearless. I may not have been consciously aware of these fears, but there they were, large, ugly blasts of raw energy, embarrassing to me and to no one else in their intensity. There were old fears and a constant inflow of new ones. With this awareness came a major revelation. Inside, I had instituted this process and kept the fear-dissolving operation flowing as needed. No outside source was providing any assistance, and as I had wrongfully assumed, I was helping myself. So again, he finds the fear layer. There's no fear here in the mind war, of course, but he finds a layer of kind of hidden fears, ones that weren't really conscious to him, but were still subconsciously controlling him. And through the Gateway Experience tapes and through the tools that we've been learning here, he, like we, are breaking down those fears inside of us. We break every one of them down. And again, like we just talked about, sometimes you have to go and relive your past because you make a mistake in the past and that makes you fearful of making the same bad mistake in the future. So maybe you don't make any decision at all. Well, that's a mistake as well. We break down those fears. And what he's saying is that once you start to do it, once you overcome a few of those known fears, a process begins internally, subconsciously. And it starts to break down all those other subconscious fears that you maybe weren't really consciously thinking about, but they start to melt away as well. And maybe you find yourself, again, being more bold and focused and progressive and successful because of it. Those fears are starting to melt away. And again, he said, no outside source was providing any assistance as I had wrongly assumed. Remember all these spirit guides that he's talking about. He says, I was helping myself. I'm telling you, folks, it's us. We are the ones that help ourselves. We don't have to look externally, right? We help ourselves. And then we find other like-minded individuals in our first Earth Battalion, little, group of friends. And then we start to help each other as well. And then we start to act together to help as a collective, okay? Next, we have the emotional layer. This was the next inward cloud of energy that I met. I knew all of these emotions, not those that had been repressed, but those past and present that I had lived and treasured, both joyous and sad, and the irrational angers that were now so amusing to me. My irrational anger from the past is not amusing to me. Maybe I still need to go and revisit some of those irrational angers, some of those, just bad things, just being a shitty guy, to me, those aren't amusing yet. So I think maybe I still need to tear some of those down. As with the fears, there was a constant incoming pattern, mimicking what I felt at each moment. The interesting part was that layer seemed so neatly organized. So sometimes you think of emotions as, again, being irrational. So you would picture them as scrambled and being all over, and oh, my emotions are all over the place. And he's saying, no, emotions, when you go and review them, they're actually well organized. Probably more well organized than analytical thought. Next, he says there is a broken barrier. I thought this was interesting. He says, I also understood what had happened in my own pattern, what had made that whole. So again, he's saying that he has kind of run into that barrier. We talked about it as a steel plate barrier. All the steel plates are riveted together, and you kind of bump into it in the darkness, and you're looking at it. You have just a little kind of flashlight in front of you, and he is starting to break through that barrier. So what is that barrier? The answer was simple erosion through repeated experience. The amusing part was that in my eagerness, I had never paused to notice the very real existence of the barrier. So as he's continually, going up against the barrier and attempting to push through it, he's starting to wear away. He's starting to create this hole because he keeps working at it. So again, what was the barrier made of? Earth life system addiction and the multitude of belief systems generated therein. The addictions that come with being alive. Okay. The easy addictions we can point out: drugs, alcohol, working too hard, money, sex, whatever it is that you're addicted to. Those are the top level ones. Some people call them sins. And then there are other ones that are more difficult to deal with, things like gluttony. Well, we all have to eat, right? But some people, it becomes an addiction. It becomes a problem for us. Okay, those are the different levels of that addiction. And then he also says this barrier is made of the multitude of belief systems. Again, the societal, cultural, and religious wet blankets that are placed upon us by the organizations, corporations, and institutions that pollute our minds, poison our bodies, and corrupt our souls. That's what we're talking about. That's what the mind war is all about. That's what the occult technician is here to share and try to break apart those things so we understand what they truly are and how they truly work against us, how they create barriers in front of us, and how we can work through them. Eventually, I had once slipped through a crack, either by accident or otherwise, and kept widening the opening by usage, probably through gathering information and increasing experience, until that part of the barrier crumbled. So again, if you're somebody who was born into a religious household, a religion that you no longer or maybe never felt a part of, felt close to, felt connected to, you've always recognized it for what it truly is. Maybe that's one of those barriers in your life. Maybe you tried to lie to yourself like I did for a long time. I tried to be a Christian, folks. Oh, I tried. And I failed every time because I realized it's not real. And that's one of those barriers. And it takes time, continued probing and attacking the barrier. And eventually it crumbled. And that happened for me too. It's still crumbling. The barrier of religion is still crumbling. Now I don't put my personal thoughts and beliefs and hopes and all that into religion anymore. But I still find myself looking at the political, social, and cultural landscapes and what's going on in current events and all that stuff and say, oh, this looks biblical. And I start to realize I can't think that way anymore. about to go into World War III over in the Middle East because of the Bible and prophecies that are coming and all that nonsense. That's not what it is, okay? All the wars that are going on right now, it's all business related, and it doesn't really seem to be anything more than that. But in order to get people to fight, in order to get people to feel like they're connected to these battles that really are just about dollars, and maybe some territory or whatever, they put these kind of religious overtones. They put these religious wet blankets over it so people will fight, right? And those are the barriers that we break down. So Monroe then again shifts this the rest of this chapter. It goes into a whole different path where now he's talking about how he's trying to give examples of reincarnation, maybe. Again, I don't really believe in reincarnation, but he's trying to say stuff like he was interested in being a pilot because at one time he was a bird and he remembers living as a bird on the side of a cliff with his bird family. The individual spirit that made up Robert Monroe and animated his physical body, that exact individual spirit was never in a bird, okay? That exact same one, right? When Robert Monroe, just like all the rest of us, when we're born, I've talked about this before, out in the universe, out in the abyss, there's a cloud, a spirit cloud, God, whatever you want to call it. And that cloud, each raindrop that comes from the cloud becomes that individual person, okay? And when we die, that individual drop, evaporates right back up into the cloud and becomes part of the whole. It gets mixed back in the cloud again. You can't take a drop of water, put it into a bucket, and then pull that exact same drop of water out again. Never going to happen. Now it's mixed in, it's gone forever. It's part of the whole, but you can never have it individually again. I think Monroe easily could have been tapping into those Akashic records, whatever that technology is that holds the life of all living beings in the universe and the memories of their life. And maybe he just tapped into, oh, hey, this bird, I'm going to go kind of live through its eyes and see what it was like. I think we can do that. Again, I think we can interact with the past. I think we can review the past, right? And so he tries to go through several different stories about this reincarnation. But there was one that kind of caught my eye. And this was revolving around him designing and building the Monroe Institute, the actual physical architecture building called the Monroe Institute. And at the center of the Monroe Institute is a very tall tower. It's looks like it's about 4 or 5 stories tall, right in the middle of the building. It's very phallic tower right in the middle of the building. It's all made out of glass and it almost looks like a missile or whatever. And then you can see the rest of the building coming off each side. And so again, that's the Monroe Institute Central Tower in Nelson County, Virginia, USA, constructed in 1989 by Robert Monroe and friends. So the other architects and stuff, right? So the reason I bring that up is because a family member went on vacation to Scotland and took a picture of another building that looked almost identical, okay? So now when the family member took this picture, he didn't think anything of it. He didn't show it to Robert Monroe. He never brought it up to him. It was just part of his pictures. He just was taking pictures of the architecture. So when Robert Monroe built the Monroe Institute and then had his big grand opening, and this family member came and said, holy cow, this looks exactly like a building that I saw in Scotland. And he says, here's some of the information about that building, okay, that looked exactly the same. That building is in near Inverness, Scotland. It was constructed in 1151 AD. It's called the Foulous Castle Tower, and it was built by a man named Robert Monroe and his father. Now, Monroe is spelled differently. This Monroe from the past is M-U-N-R-O, where the Robert Monroe that we are talking about is M-O-N-R-O-E. So there is a different spelling, but it sounds exactly the same. Two Robert Monroes designed the same type of building. It looks almost exactly the same here in the picture. Hundreds of years apart. Now, Monroe is trying to say, again, that's an example or evidence of reincarnation. I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily believe, again, that he was reincarnated, but maybe there was definitely some type of spiritual connection there. So I thought that was interesting. But again, folks, another very strange and esoteric chapter. Again, where he's trying to show other kind of examples of reincarnation and saying, oh, I like being an architect because in the past I was a stonemason or whatever it is. Okay, cool, man. If that's what you want to believe, that's great. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's okay. So again, another strange chapter. That was chapter 11, Turning Inward, from the book Ultimate Journey by Robert Monroe. So we're going to be doing a deep dive into Wave 5 Exploring, Tape 6, Exploring Focus 15, after a word from our sponsor.
Mind War is sponsored by Victory Work Apparel. Use promo code Mind War.
Welcome back, folks. Let's do our deep dive into Wave 5 Exploring, Tape 6, Exploring Focus 15. It says, in this exercise, you will explore the far reaches of Focus 15. In Focus 15, the state of no time, state of stillness, simply being, you are calm and comfortable in Focus 15. You are free to explore the nature of intuition, to experience the creative energy within you, to express your true essence, to simply be in the stillness that exists deep within you. I will call you when it is time to return, and when I do, you will remember in great detail all that you have experienced. And then you go into Focus 15. In the majority of this tape, this was a very loud tape. Again, it just was the sound of the spaceship taking off. Just the jet boosters. Maybe there was waves in the background. There's always kind of multiple layers of sounds happening, but the majority of this tape was just that spaceship, right? And it was, when it said time to get to this stillness point, that felt very interesting. It was almost like the spirit body was kind of stiff. It was still expanding outward. I felt very large when listening to this tape, if that makes sense. And when I returned from this tape, that's where things, again, I always say it's the return where things get very strange. But when I returned from this large, expanded version of myself, I really felt shriveled up. I felt like an old man. And that was kind of difficult to deal with, but I definitely felt how small we as humans really are. If that makes any sense. If this idea that our spirit is so much larger than the physical body, when I was returning to the physical, I felt really shriveled and really small. That was a strange feeling. That was a strange return. Now, In Focus 15, again, we're left for about 20 minutes to just kind of explore. And it talks here about just being still, right? So my whole focus during this tape was just to, not have any specific thoughts, not go into it with any, purpose, right? I just wanted to achieve stillness. That was very difficult to do on the KSS psilocybin enhancements. Again, that was kind of like a sativa strain of magic mushrooms, and my mind was really electrified. I mean, it was kind of difficult to focus. And so I'm kind of looking out into the darkness, but by now it's just kind of radiant white light, a lot of fractals kind of happening, nothing like a DMT trip or anything like that. It's much chiller from what I've seen. I've never done DMT myself, but so I'm trying to just focus and just be still. And literally, like the second that I try to focus, all of a sudden it's just like pew, 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 all of these different, again, kind of television screens or whatever coming at me. And each one was like a different dream that I could just join. It was like just flipping through the channels. Here's the next dream that you can join in on, whichever path you want to follow, right? And I was trying to say, like, no, all of you go away. I just want to deal with this stillness. And it was the harder that I fought against it, the more I would kind of fall into this dream. And I had to keep pulling myself out, right? And so that was kind of the visualization of just this constant influx of different things, almost trying to distract me, right? And so the only visualization that I really took from this wasn't a vision that came to me. This was me imagining how I was going to explain this to you folks, right? And so what I was seeing in my mind was, okay, in the left side of your mind, right, there was a little avatar of me in the left side of my mind. And I'm standing there in my left brain, right, the analytical, the very wide awake conscious side of my brain. I'm standing there with a flashlight. And there's a big glass wall in front of me. And on the other side of the glass was the right brain. And the right brain is just black abyss with all sorts of thoughts swirling in and out and all around. And it was hard to kind of focus on any of it. And so there I am with my flashlight trying to shine it through this glass wall and see what the hell is going on out into the abyss. And I mean, of course, I couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of me. All I saw was just these different kind of, again, dream scenarios that I could go in and out of. I didn't choose any of them to follow. I think if I would have fully fallen asleep, I think I would have just went into one of those dream scenarios and had the dream and whatever, fell into unconsciousness, right? But that visually is the best way that I can explain it. Again, that left brain, we've been talking a lot about that. That's our analytical side. That's the side of us that is really conscious and focused. And that right brain is the physical side where our intuition and our instincts lie. That's that side of our mind that hasn't changed from early human. That's the side of the mind that we're still exploring. That's the side of the mind where magic occurs, where we do our manifestation and where our intuition speaks to us from. And again, there I was with my flashlight, looking into the abyss going, hey, what's out there? How do I understand this better? So personally, I didn't really enjoy this tape much. Again, it was way too loud. I kind of like those tapes that are really quiet, that force you to focus on hearing the kind of pin drop sounds, right? I think those are very powerful in a way. This one was just that spaceship taking off. Again, it can be very powerful. I think in the right mindset, it would be. Last night, that just wasn't it. Again, I think that KSS psilocybin strain, I've tried it before with the same kind of results of just almost like this inability to stay focused, almost kind of manic thinking, right? Where, again, it felt a lot like the anxiety that I talked about when I was trying to clean the Mind War estates, right? This, you just have so many thoughts, you don't know which one to hold on to. And really what I took away from that is sometimes when you get into that state of mind where you're having a million thoughts at once, right? You grab onto one thought and you try a few things and maybe you start to try to act on it and nothing's working and then you back off frustrated. But you're still in this kind of really overexcited, nervous kind of mode. So you grab the next thought that comes in and let me just start working on this. Oh shit, this isn't working either. And now, again, because it's not just thoughts in your mind anymore, now you're in real life trying to do this, trying to do that. And now you've taken on 5, 6 things at one time. None of them are working out because you're not focusing on any of them. You're just in a manic spiral, crashing downwards because you get more and more frustrated as each thing fails around you, right? One of the things that I learned from this tape was sometimes you just have to shut them all down, right? You just have to say no to all of them. I'm not doing any of these things right now. The million thoughts that are in my mind, they can all wait, right? Sometimes we just have to relax. Sometimes we just have to allow ourselves to recover, recuperate, right? And center ourselves again. Okay. And that's where I'm at, literally at this very moment, still attempting to kind of center myself from not only last night and how exciting that was, but over the last few weeks of just this kind of heightened excitement and nervousness. And really even, because this is the second episode of Mind War that I've recorded today. And even the first one, I was nervous. And even in this one, I think you'll see that I'm nervous. There's going to be some cuts, I think, here and there. I just need to center again, right? And I think coming down here, getting these episodes out, getting these episodes recorded, this helps a lot. Really sharing these stories with all of you helps me release some of that nervous energy of like, holy shit, here's the things that have gone on. I can't wait to share them with all of you. And that's the exciting part of doing the podcast, right? So I don't have a ton of details right now because I'm still in the middle of this, folks, but I wanted to bring this up real quick before we finish. I've been working very hard at getting the Mind War podcast on more platforms than just YouTube. So right now, you're probably watching this on YouTube. You can also get the podcast audio on YouTube Music. So if you just want to listen to the audio version. But I've also been downloading past episodes. I've caught up all the way through season 4 on Spotify. So if you go to Spotify and search for Mind War, you can find me there. And then Spotify gives you an RSS feed, which I then put into Amazon Music. You can find the Mind War podcast on Amazon Music. That's awesome. iHeartRadio, it's available on now. I put it on a couple other podcast apps I don't really remember the name of. I've never really used any of them, but I put them out in their directories the best I could. I think there was an RSS directory itself that I submitted it to, so who knows how far that's going to reach. And Apple, I know you keep denying me from creating an account and keep saying that, we can't do it right now. We'll do it another day. But Victor, the occult technician, is going to create an Apple ID and eventually get the Mind War on Apple Podcasts for whoever the hell still listens to anything on Apple anymore. So, folks, that was, again, Wave 5, Exploring, Tape 6, Exploring, Focus 15. We knocked out a few more chapters from Ultimate Journey. The Mind War podcast is available on more apps than ever. If you have questions on where you can find it, please reach out to me. And as always, I appreciate you being here. And remember, folks, Harden your hearts and open your minds, because this is Mind War.